It's the SeizeYourBusiness.com podcast with Tony Rourke and Kevin O'Flaherty.
SeizeYourBusiness.com, making you money. Share it on Facebook, share it on LinkedIn, Twitter, our blogs, YouTube videos. Listen to our podcast, getting so hot that it's burning up the stereo.
Welcome to the SeizeYourBusiness.com podcast. I'm your host, Kevin O'Flaherty from O'Flaherty Law. I'm joined by my co-host, Scott Mathis from Plateau to Peak Consulting. Today, our guest is Jim Waszak from Success Enhancement, and our topic is going to be effective performance reviews. If you find the podcast helpful or if you just want to help us, please download us on iTunes and leave us some written reviews. We appreciate it. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Jim. Jim, thanks for being here with us today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
I know you got a lot of experience in business. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience and what you do now?
Sure. Well, the early part of my career, I started out in accounting and finance. Became CFO at a manufacturing company. We grew from about 120 people to about 250 people, and revenues went up about 5 times while I was CFO. So I did all the CFO type tasks. I also started the HR function. I started the IT function. So I had a pretty well-rounded career as a CFO. The company, after all that growth, was having a huge problem in manufacturing. Couldn't get product out, couldn't get people working together, had too much inventory, had drug problems, alcohol theft, union, you name it, we had it. So after a couple of fellas failed to make any difference, I finally went to the owner and said, why don't you let me run manufacturing? He said, what do you know about manufacturing? You're an accountant. I said, I don't know anything about manufacturing, but I know the people. I know they need a leader. So he said, okay. And I sat down with everybody and I said, look, these are our goals. We're going to get here. Your job is to tell me what's getting in your way, and I'll get it out of your way. And if you don't want to be here to pursue these goals, you don't have to. So the people really responded to that.
So there wasn't a big pushback from the change in culture that you were doing?
No, there really wasn't. I think people welcomed it because really the biggest problem was leadership. And I remember one particular case where, the background, before I tell you this piece, is engineering would design the product. And then they would accuse the manufacturing people of not being smart enough to put it together. But unbeknownst to them, I actually went myself and built the product, and it was a nightmare putting it together. So I remember one time we got into a big argument on the shop floor, the head of engineering and myself, and I told him stuff was designed by idiots. And that's why people couldn't put it together, and he was taken aback. But the rest of the manufacturing people never had anybody in their corner. So then they really believed in me. So in about a year's time, we went up 50% in sales, and we made profits about 3 times the best in our previous history. So it was a huge success. And
so if I can ask you a quick question. So what were some of the biggest things that you went in that they were doing wrong before you fixed them? And what did you fix, or common things that a lot of people might be doing wrong in their business?
Well, I think probably number one was just not having high enough expectations. I think everybody felt that the shop people were, just simply not that smart. They were more blue collar, and I think just telling them that they were going to be successful, I think was a big part of it. We did wind up replacing about 25% of the people. So it's real important to have the right people on board. Mm-hmm. That's probably the most critical thing, which can get into our later topic a little bit of performance appraisal. And then I think the other thing was supporting them. In my experience, most people want to do a good job, and it's usually some management practice that gets in their way. In fact, that reminds me of kind of a funny story. So me, I can't remember which role I was in at the time, but we had an engineer who really helped solve a problem. I don't even remember what it was. So I thought I would sort of reward him. And I was going to write a note and post it on the bulletin board and then put it in his personnel file. So I went to his immediate supervisor and I said, hey, I'm going to do this. Is that okay with you? Are there any issues? He said, no, that's a great idea. He'll really appreciate it. So I write this thing up, post it, and passed it out and everything. And no sooner do I do that, I get a call from the head of engineering. He says, what did you do that for? And I said, well, I was trying to help the guy. No, we're thinking about getting rid of him. So I says, okay, well, I didn't know that. So then I get a call from the owner. So I go over to his office. He says, what'd you do that for? And I said, well, I didn't know. I thought I was doing the right thing by asking his boss. So I had that lecture. So then on the way back, the HR person calls me over. I said, what'd you do that for? So I'm thinking, okay, here's a good example of management killing the enthusiasm of employees. Now, I was, in an executive position, so, I'm not going to be intimidated by this. But imagine if a rank and file employee comes up with an idea and then just gets hammered for suggesting that idea. Do you think he's ever going to suggest another idea?
Right.
Probably not.
Yeah.
Probably not. So, and I think, I can tell you story after story about the amazing successes we had by engaging people.
Did you end up getting rid of that guy? Or did they keep him?
I don't remember. I think maybe they did eventually let him go.
Seems like there was, a big communication.
Yeah.
Well, sure,
issue in this
absolutely,
organization.
because the supervisor and the head of the department weren't.
And they weren't communicating
weren't
with
on the same
manufacturing engineers.
Right.
So
Right.
is
So
that one of the things that you kind of helped them fix?
Communication is always an issue. Yeah, I think so. But again, I think the main thing was giving people a person that they could, rely on as a leader.
What does support look like in that situation? Because everyone would like to support their employees and remove the obstacles to success. What does that look like for you in those situations?
Well, I think the key is that you need to ask them what they need. I think a lot of management is used to sort of telling people, I want you to do this, I want you to do that, etc. My approach was always, hey, look, this is what I need to get accomplished. What do you need from me to be able to do it? And people don't. People just don't naturally do that. I don't know if they feel uncomfortable in the role of the boss, that they think they have to have all the answers, but getting input from your people is just huge. That's
what you're saying reminds me a lot of when Scott came and helped me revamp my organization. I remember, Scott, you would ask, you'd say, here's what we need to get done. Can you do it? What are the obstacles preventing you from doing it? I'm here if you need me to remove those obstacles.
Exactly.
Let me be a resource for you.
Exactly.
And we had to let a lot of people go too that were,
well,
that just weren't the right people. But
that's part of it. We let
the obstacle was that person.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that happens. But continuing the story of how I got to where I am. So I left that position. After about 5 years, all the problems were fixed, so I wasn't really enjoying it that much, and decided I would be a consultant and entrepreneur, which I've done since then. And more recently, the exciting thing I've come up with is the notion of using comedy to help businesses improve. I'd always liked joking around and being silly and being kind of a goof.
So were you the class clown?
I was, to a certain extent. I'm usually the clown in whatever environment.
Did they tell you that'd get you nowhere?
No, I don't know if they told me that. I was one of the bigger kids in class, so they didn't usually tell me too much. But I started fooling around a little bit with comedy and took an improv class, which I loved. And people were telling me, oh, you're taking the class. You should be teaching the class. And we did a little show, which was great. And have been doing some volunteer work and helping people find jobs at Community Career Center in Naperville. And thought, how can I combine the two? So I started doing little workshops where we do a little improv comedy about networking or interviewing or something like that. And then we'd get into the meat of the topic. And I found people were just having a blast at it. They loved it, and they were getting more out of the learning. So
Explain to me how that works. Just from someone who's got no acting background, never taken an
Right.
improv course.
Wait, when I
It's hard
thought
for
you
me
were
to
an
connect
attorney.
the dots. Yeah.
Aren't you acting all the
No,
time?
I just tell the truth.
What?
As I see it.
Now wait a minute. Now this should be documented. An attorney who tells the truth. I
Yeah.
mean, give me a break. But as an example, the way it might work is one area where most job seekers struggle is on interviewing. So what we'll do a little improv part, and we'll create some goofy roles for myself and another person, and we'll do an interview, and it'll of course go very badly, and then we'll redo it more seriously, and then it goes well. Then I'll have people from the audience come up, and they'll talk about the way, we'll do a mock interview with them interviewing it, and then I'll go ahead and tweak their interview, and it's remarkably better.
So you're basically running people through the process of being interviewed.
Correct.
Through improv.
Yeah. Well, we do the improv to loosen people up, and people laugh a little bit, and then that always makes it a more comfortable environment. But there's all kind of applications. I've done some for Cog Hill Golf Club on employee service. And I believe there's pretty much no business problem that I can't improve the doing kind of an improv-based
So to
workshop.
take it over to employee service, you'd be maybe the customer on the other end of the phone and run them through some scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's interesting.
And, it might be crazy scenarios. And, initially we were kind of doing it just for entertainment, but the questions were coming out. I mean, serious questions were coming out no matter how we put it. So it just kind of creates a comfortable, fun environment for people.
Now that's one tool among many in your business coaching toolbox, right?
Correct.
Well, what other business coaching services?
Well, we could do one-on-one coaching for people to improve in their job. We could do process improvement. We do some sales training. I mean, I kind of look at it more or less from an owner standpoint and say, hey, where's this business at? What does it need to get to the next level? And then figure out how to provide whatever it needs.
Sure.
And if it's not me personally, I've got a broad network of different service providers who can help in pretty much any area of the business. But I think it really starts with that notion of, where you're trying to get to and what's getting in your way. I think for a lot of smaller business owners, I think they struggle a lot with positioning themselves properly, either being too broad or too vague in what they do. And another thing that you touched on a little earlier is performance appraisals.
Yeah, let's dig into that.
Sure. It seems to me, in pretty much my experience, it's almost universally done poorly. Companies either don't know how to do it, are afraid of it, don't see the importance of it.
Yeah, I was telling you this is something I struggle with.
Right. And first of all, I think there's two really important reasons for doing it. Number one, if you don't tell somebody what's expected, where they're succeeding, where they're failing, the odds of getting the performance you want are poor. And secondarily, in our litigious society, you could get sued all kind of ways for letting people go. I mean, they're protected by age and race and ethnic background and religion and everything else. So the performance appraisal creates a documented record of what the person is not performing, up to stuff. We actually, a company I was with once, there was a guy that we wanted to let go. It didn't work for me. And so our practice was always we reviewed with our labor attorney. And they said, well, let me see his performance appraisal. So we had these performance appraisals. And he said, you can't fire this guy. He's a star performer. How can you fire him for performance? So I think it's really important to do. And I think there's probably 2 or 3 reasons why people don't do it. I think number one is they don't make it clear from day one what the expectations are of the person. Some companies, especially smaller companies, may not have any kind of written job description. Some may have one, but it may not be up to date, may not be accurate. So we're starting out where, there's not really a standard. I think the second thing is people aren't trained to do it. So they're very awkward. I mean, it's always easy to talk about somebody when they're not around, but if you're telling them face to face, what are you doing right and what are you not doing right, that's difficult for people. One of the keys to be able to do that is remember that you're not assessing the person themselves, you're assessing their behaviors, because most people are fundamentally good. And I think the third thing is people just aren't, haven't been trained to do it. One of the things I found real effective was before the performance appraisal, I'd have the person appraise themselves. And then they'd bring it into me, and then we'd go from there. And surprisingly, in most cases, they rated their performance poorer than I would have.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, this would be like a great topic to do some of these improv skits around, because we can have fun with it. And
if they're the ones that are pointing out the issue, then you don't have to feel like, the bad guy.
Correct, unless they're missing the point.
Yeah.
But you want to start, once again, with what's the goal, what's the objective, what's being measured. And, it's still not perfect, but you're not necessarily trying to get perfect. You're just trying to get better.
How do you figure out key performance indicators for something like admin staff? For attorneys, it's easy. We can say, okay, you got to bill X amount of hours. You got to, stay within the client's retainers. That's, easy nuts and bolts stuff to measure.
Right.
Support staff for us has been more difficult. We can do percentage of projects completed on time or flawlessly.
Right.
But, how do you go about setting KPIs for?
Well, I think you have both the quantifiable and the qualitative. And for some fields, like you said, for attorneys, or salespeople are often easy. How much did you sell? The ones that are more in support functions, sometimes you have to do a little bit more qualitative. Maybe are things getting done on time? Are customers being treated properly? Are phone calls answered quickly enough? One of the things when I was CFO, one of the targets we had, how do you measure the controller's performance? And one of the targets I set was that we would close the month within 5 days, which is pretty good. And once I set that, she said, well, it's going to be hard. I said, well, what are all the things that need to be done? Just tell me what everybody needs. So we did, and we got very good at it. And in fact, another cool story, my son was born 2 days after the end of the fiscal year. So I took some time off to, be on paternity leave. And when I came back, everything was done. Books were closed, inventory was reconciled. It was almost like it went better than if I had been there because I wasn't in their way.
Yeah.
But it's just clearly the two things are, if you get the right people and you kind of set them in the right direction, it usually works out pretty well. And in fact, sometimes just simply setting a goal will get results.
Mm-hmm.
There's actually a caution, though. When you set a goal for people, and if you put a reward on it, whether it's financial or otherwise, people are going to go do that. So you want to make sure your goals are all in sync so that you don't have people working on competing goals, creating stress.
Talk to me a little bit about a situation or example where you might have competing goals that would create stress.
Sure. Well, an example from my background was in manufacturing. We have an engineering department. So the owner tells engineering, we need new products. We got to keep up with the marketplace. So engineering has all these new products they're supposed to be designing. They tell manufacturing, we want to cut costs. So you got to cut costs. Now, the problem is, if you want to cut costs of the product, we could always find vendors who would give us a better quote, but we can't move forward without engineering checking it. We could always find vendors who would tell us new ways to manufacture the product or a component, but again, we need engineering to review this. So engineering then is torn, do they support manufacturing and the cost-cutting initiative, or do they support new product development? And that kind of stuff happens, all the time in companies. There was a project I did once. This kind of gets back to the admin staff. And this company had grown kind of by sort of, I don't know if I want to say randomly, but a little bit haphazardly. So the owner says, I've got these 5 or 6 people in the office. None of their jobs make sense anymore, because the task would come up and they'd throw it on this person, they throw it on that person. Can you sort this out? And he was actually kind of terrified because he felt he was going to upset all these people. So, I sat down with them, and what we did, we put each task on a little sticky notepad, Post-it pad. And then as a group, we said, okay, which of these jobs belongs in which of these tasks belong in which of these jobs? So we did that, and it came out great, partly because the people had input, and probably because we had an organized way of doing it. And he was just stunned.
And you didn't find people trying to push off tasks?
No, not at all. Not at all. I think that happens when you don't have people involved early enough. There was, when I moved into the manufacturing job, we decided we were going to relay out the plant. So we had these different drawings posted on the wall. So the owner comes over and he says, well, which of these different layouts do you think is going to work the best? And I thought about it for a second. And I said, you know what? The one that people believe in, because they'll make it work.
Sure.
So I think if you, I think you want to engage people. You want to tell them, where you're trying to get to. And then you want to monitor that performance, maybe on a fairly frequent basis, informally, but also with a performance appraisal.
So let me ask you about a hard case here. It's easy to say, okay, you get a raise or you get this bonus if you meet these goals. And if you're not meeting your bare minimum numbers, then that you're going to get a written letter,
right,
and then terminated.
Right.
What do you do in the case where someone's not meeting their bonus goals, but they're not quite so bad that they're not meeting their expectations, but it's not to the point where you really are dying to fire them over it? How do you correct small sins that add up and become a muck in the gears?
Yeah, well, that's a question that kind of comes into the judgment category. Somebody, I forget where I heard this, but somebody said the people who come in on a daily basis and get their job done are going to kill you, because they're never going to innovate. They're never going to become leaders. So I think you've got to kind of, make somewhat of a judgment call. And it's hard to have a universal solution because people are all so different. But if the person has the ability to be creative and maybe a leadership person, or take some risks or take on more, then you want to find out why it's not happening. If they don't, then you've got a couple options. Do you have a spot that really doesn't require those things? And if you're a smaller entrepreneurial company, you don't, because you got to have everybody pulling together.
Right.
And if they don't, then you probably got to move on. Especially today, there seems to be a lot of talented people out there.
So you don't need to wait for someone's performance to reach like D or F level. If they're getting a C or a B minus, well, you might want to consider moving on to the some A+.
I guess there's two things to consider. The first question is, do you want this person or not? If you don't want the person, then you've got to figure out the how. Now, technically, unless something's changed, but Illinois is an at-will state, which means you could fire anybody for any time for whatever reason. However, you do have these protective categories that run counter to that. And, if you've got a person who's the only one of that, ethnic group or demographic, and that's the person, there might be some exposure. So it kind of becomes how much support do you need to be comfortable in doing that? Now, again, it becomes a business question. Are you better off moving on from this person and getting the person you really need, even at the risk of a potential claim later? Those are the tough calls in business.
That's something me and Scott struggled with when he first came in to help me out. We had an office manager who was like, the invoices were going out. I thought he was doing an acceptable job, but we'd ask him to do more things, and it just wasn't getting done, and it wasn't getting done. And it was, how do you prod someone without losing them morale-wise? Now, that guy turned out to be a bad apple, and it turned out that there was no amount of prodding that we would have been able to do.
Right.
So, now we say, we wish we had gotten our new office manager 6 months earlier.
Right.
But at the time, you think about, oh man, all the hassle of turnover, getting a new office manager. If I could just get this person to perform a little bit better, and all the rewards aren't doing it.
Right.
Maybe.
Well, there's two things I would say, and the first one is to do with what you said about you wish you had gotten rid of them sooner.
Yeah.
I was giving a talk once to about 200 people, and this subject came up. So I polled the audience and I said, how many of you have ever fired a person and you felt after you fired them badly because you thought you could have given them more time, or maybe you could have worked with them more? 2 or 3 hands went up. How many of you fired somebody and felt, gee, I should have fired that person 6 months ago?
That's happened almost every time.
Virtually everybody. So, I used to kind of take the analogy, and actually I'll tell you a very good story on this. I used to have the analogy of a football team. You're drafting players, you got free agents, and what do you look for? You're always looking to be better. And if you've got a guy who's the, 50th guy on the roster, and he's done okay, and you can replace him with another guy who you think is going to be just a little bit better, you're going to do that. I think business should be the same way. I had a situation once. We had an accounts payable clerk who was kind of like, you said, that came in, did her job, wasn't probably going to be anything more than that, was not going to be innovative. And I forget the reason, but we had a temporary person come in. Somebody was off sick or something. And as the temporary assignment is ending, I made the decision that I would keep the temporary and, let go of the steady worker who I didn't think had potential. And, in some ways it's kind of unfair, but, it's a competitive environment and you want to get the best people you can. So the other point I was going to make is, generally speaking, you're not going to change people. If a person is fundamentally lazy, let's say, you're not going to change them. However, you can change the environment to better fit the person. So, for example, if you've got, and I'm totally making this up, you've got an administrative person who likes talking to customers but hates doing paperwork, and you have him or her doing billing, that may not work so good. Mm-hmm. But if you had that person doing customer relations and talking to the customers or the clients, that might be a great fit. There was a guy who worked for me who was a shop supervisor, and he was not performing well. And it was a little bit of a dilemma because he had been with the company a long time. Well, I sat down with him and I just had a very candid discussion. I said, this is what's not working, and if it doesn't change, you're going to move on. What's getting in your way? And he told me some legitimate issues he had with the way the union contract was put together, with the amount of training he'd received. So we fixed those, and the guy turned into a star. He came in 3 o'clock in the morning when the alarm would go off. He ran the company picnic. And the best part for me was when he was leaving the company, or when I was leaving the company. And this is like a blue-collar, burly guy. He comes up to me, he puts his arm around me. I'm really going to miss you. You changed my life, which is like really cool.
Yeah.
So I think part of it is to say, okay, what can we change to make this person really thrive? I'll give you, another kind of comical example. If my wife asks me to do, cleaning around the house, I'm not too motivated to do that, So she says, oh, you should do some cleaning today. So I go back to her later. So I did some cleaning. I cleaned my golf clubs. Oh, that's not what I meant. But I was excited to clean my golf clubs because I love,
Yeah.
So I think most people have something that sort of turns them on, excites them. And if they're not in an environment that's allowing them, the kindest thing you might be doing is to let them go and let them find the environment that, keeping somebody they're not comfortable, you're not comfortable. I think you got to move on. I think you got to get, and another thing I'll just comment on, which I find to some degree humorous, because a lot of people will when they're hiring, they'll highly value experience. Have you done this before? I look at it a little differently. I say, yeah, maybe they've done it for 20 years and hated it for 20 years. Why do I want to hire that guy who's going to be and I'd rather hire the person who maybe has lighter experience but has enthusiasm or excitement about what I'm trying to accomplish, and I'll train them what they need to
I agree with you there.
do, within reason. I mean, you're not going to take a plumber and make him an attorney probably, but you could take an attorney and make him no, I'm just teasing.
Well, you're not going to get me to be able to figure that out.
Yeah.
Plumbing out, that's one thing my dad didn't teach me.
Yeah, right.
Taught me a lot about business. That's about it.
So it's about finding really those right strengths. There's another tool that I use sometimes with a colleague of mine called a DISC, which is a personality profiling type tool, and it talks about behaviors, the different kind of communication styles, and that can be used to resolve issues too.
Yeah. Well, anything else you want to add, Scott?
No.
Jim, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you, Kevin.
If someone wants to reach you and get your help, how can they reach you?
They could reach me by phone at 630-272-3895, 630-272-3895, or my email, successjw@aol.com.
Okay. Thanks so much, Jim.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Fast forward Sunday morning when we flash back to Saturday.